Hi, this is Matt from Working Fintech, and today we're really excited to be joined with Dr. Iwa Salami. She's a reader and associate professor in financial law and regulation at the School of Business and Law, and as well as being co-director of the Centre of Fintech at the University of East London. So her research areas have been focused on financial regulation in emerging and frontier markets, and our current research explores regulation around Web3, central bank digital currencies, DAOs, and the metaverse. So Iwa, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's an absolute pleasure to be with you today, Matthew. Thank you for inviting me.
So could you just, I gave you a little short introduction there, but could you just talk through some of your background with areas of research you've been looking at, career so far?
So basically my research, my career actually started out studying law and obviously took an interest in it and decided then to do a master's degree in law. And I did that at the University of London, Queen Mary, based at actually based at King's College. And so I then took an interest actually in financial law. One of the courses I took was the regulation of financial markets. And basically that kind of sort of introduced me to the idea of, the rationale of regulation, why regulation is key, why it's important, but then also introduced the legal aspect, the importance and the role of law in creating robust financial systems, financial services, and the like. And my interest in that then, developed even further. And I thought, actually, I want to research a certain area deeper. One of the areas that we covered, the legal aspects of financial and monetary unions. And so I took a deep, profound interest in that. My PhD then focused on the legal and institutional infrastructure for monetary unions, but then looking at the requirements for it to succeed in frontier and emerging markets. And I did a comparative assessment with the EU, focusing really on African economies. So for me, that really caught my interest. And one of the areas that I really then homed in on was financial integration. So looking at the legal infrastructure, legal and regulatory requirements to actually build robust financial integration arrangements, again, focused here now on Africa. And so I looked at that, moved on. So when I finished my PhD, which was completed a few years ago, I then began to look at the way that financial regulation sort of paves the way, if you like, and the extent to which it paves the way for financial inclusion and the implications, positives of regulation to help achieve sort of financial inclusion. One of the areas that struck my attention or caught my interest was looking at developments, for example, happening with mobile payments and in places like Kenya. So through the M-Pesa. So what the M-Pesa was able to sort of help achieve by people sort of owning mobile phones and being able to sort of, engage in financial services and financial transactions and monetary transactions just through having a mobile phone. And whilst I was actually doing that, mobile payments and mobile money and the way that it emerged and developed in East Africa was happening around about 2007, 2008 and beyond. And whilst I was actually doing that, this whole talk around financial technology began to kind of emerge because that was happening around about the financial crisis of 2007 and beyond. And so there's this whole talk about how technology can help facilitate certain types of financial innovation, transactions. And round about that time, we had the launch of Bitcoin, but much more looking at them from the opportunities to actually facilitate financial inclusion. So that was another dimension of my financial inclusion discovery, if you like, and research. And so I began to look at cryptocurrencies and then looking at the legal requirements, the regulatory requirements around them. And there were huge dimensions applicable, if you like, to regulation that hadn't actually been dealt with in just the way that blockchain technology and through its application of sort of Bitcoin worked. There were huge gaps. And so at the time, actually, when I began to sort of look at this area, a lot of the talk was around using Bitcoin in places like the dark web, Silk Road, and all sorts of crime that were facilitated. But for me, I began to sort of look at things holistically, looking at it from a financial inclusion perspective, looking at it from a privacy perspective and the like. And really, that was how I kind of found myself really exploring deeper and deeper into looking at Web3 technologies. So my interest has really evolved around sort of the regulatory dimensions of these technologies, because of course there are positives, and we can see significantly that there are advantages to the operation of this financial innovation coming from these technologies. But then looking at the regulatory dimensions in a way that, you know, these technologies are adopted without sort of stifling, without sort of jeopardizing financial stability and all the other things that regulators are concerned about, investor protection, market integrity, and all of that. You know, and still being able to achieve innovation without stifling those areas of concerns to regulators.
So it's actually a very organic journey that you've had. It makes a lot of sense now, where you originally started off looking at like emerging and frontier markets, then the mobile payments, and then blockchain, and now Web3, crypto, and so on. So how would you say regulation has actually helped fintech in the UK? In the UK, you know, London and the UK has been one of the leaders in the world for fintech, with like open banking and lots of other technology improvements. But how is regulation and a progressive kind of forward-looking, innovative regulator, how have they helped fintech? And then with that, how can regulation help crypto and Web3 kind of flourish in the same way fintech has?
So that's a very good question, because the UK really, I'd say, has led way in terms of creating that platform to help actually facilitate financial innovation. I'd say maybe slower in the area of crypto assets and transactions in crypto assets, but the UK has had that reputation, for example, in creating the regulatory platform for financial innovation and firms that are interested in financial innovation to flourish. And one of the ways is through, for example, the regulatory sandbox initiative that really stemmed from, or came from, if you like, the UK Financial Conduct Authority. It really has, if you like, has been adopted across the world now. So yes, I think the UK has actually led the way. So in certain areas in the crypto asset space, yeah, there's still quite a few areas to be explored in the UK, not just in the UK, but across the world. One of the critical areas that really attracted regulation was the know your customer requirement. So the requirement that actually virtual asset service providers or crypto asset service providers, such as exchanges, wallet providers, needed to know those who were transacting through them. The focus really had been on sort of fulfilling KYC requirements. The UK obviously came on board with that, adopted that, instituted that. Quite a number of other dimensions that regulation still needs to look at. Okay, so sort of transparency issues happening on exchanges, for example, the resilience, for example, of the way that services are conducted, even actually on exchanges. That whole, there's still a wide variety of issues around sort of crypto assets that still need to be looked at. So things like disclosure requirements that are still sort of, you know, that the UK is actually taking a step in engaging industry, academia, and technologists in paving a way of crafting some sort of regulatory approach that doesn't stifle innovation but facilitates the industry.
And is that generally the approach that governments like to take when you've got nascent industries happening? Do they allow the industry to a certain amount, have a little bit free rein at the very beginning, but then see how it forms, and then kind of start to put some of the controls and restrictions on it? Because we've kind of seen that in some of the other industries historically. But then I suppose going back to what you were saying about like investor protection kind of stands out as one of the key things, and know your client, because of the fact that historically some people have been using crypto for kind of nefarious activities and so on. Is now then the time for the regulator to work very closely with industry? Because I saw recently you were invited by the FCA into their kind of crypto sprint to help kind of form and shape the direction of how these things are going. Were there any particular themes that came out of that session with the FCA?
It's interesting with the crypto asset in the same way that some of financial regulation exists. There's usually the belief that regulation is behind industry and try to play the catch-up game, as you know, when the industry has sort of evolved in a certain dimension. There has been delays, I'd say, in the way that regulators, including in the UK, have actually come on board in regulating the space. Obviously, we're very aware that the industry is fastly advancing and is not stopping. So regulators with crypto assets, I don't think there's any country that's ahead of the game in terms of regulation. The industry is just evolving very, very quickly. And so in the case of the UK as well, there's still quite a bit of catching up to do. There's still quite a bit of catching up, whether we're looking at aspects such as DeFi or DAOs, for example. There's still there's still organizations there or associations there that are running and doing things still in a very unregulated environment. And so there's a need to actually catch up with that. But I think the tricky thing for regulators across the board and across the world is getting that balance. And it's constantly getting the balance between not stifling innovation, right, and providing a conducive environment really for innovation without actually jeopardizing, things like financial stability, as you said, investor protection, market integrity, a fair and transparent market that's accessible to all. So yes, regulation, even in the UK, is still behind, and a lot of work still needs to be done. But I have to say, because I engage quite closely with what the FCA is doing, there's a lot happening on the background to actually come on board with things. Although having said that, the industry is emerging and evolving rather speedily, and therefore regulators across the world really need to be on top of things.
So getting into some of the actual details then of how regulators approach DAOs and DeFi, if you take like DAOs, for example, like decentralized autonomous organization, there's not many countries that allow a legal wrapper to be applied to that because they are so new, going back to this thing where the regulators are playing catch up. But you have seen some countries that have, I suppose, opened their doors in a way, not quite a sandbox, but open their doors so they can welcome new businesses who do want to set up as a DAO, for example. You've got like states like Wyoming in the US, and you've got Switzerland, and some of the kind of Asian countries as well have allowed a real corporate structure and legal wrappers to be set up for DAOs. How do you see that evolving at the moment? What's the current status of like the UK and G7 countries looking at DAOs, and how do you see that progressing over the next year or two?
Okay, so that's a very good question. So you're quite right. Jurisdictions across the world are still sort of trying to wrap their heads around what these new types of organizations are about. And you're very right in sort of saying that, yes, jurisdictions such as Wyoming, Switzerland, and the like have actually led the way in sort of, devising legal wrappers around DAOs. And the whole idea around sort of legal wrappers really is around ensuring that these DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, are able to actually engage in other activities which they really can't engage in, such as contractual activity, engaging in what sort of signing contracts, fulfilling their tax obligations, for example, and the like, without actually having some sort of legal form. Okay, and so we've seen that some jurisdictions are, well, a few jurisdictions have taken quite significant steps, such as Wyoming State in the United States, by permitting the registration, for example, of algorithmically managed DAOs as limited liability companies. And basically what that sort of enables is them being able to sort of regulate aspects such as majority decision making, disclosure requirements, minimum requirements, and also things like the appointment of registered agencies. That then gives them the opportunity to actually engage in certain, the agenda, if you like, or helping them sort of operate the business that the DAO has been, designed sort of establish. Now, these countries, a lot of countries have things happening on the background, but still haven't sort of significantly putting anything in place to recognize DAOs. So the UK is working on it, but DAOs aren't recognized as yet as having some sort of legal structure around them. But having said that, though, we do have developments that have been introduced, and we have some organizations that have come together, for example, such as an organization called, or a group called the Coalition of Automated Legal Applications, who've actually come up with a model, what is known as a model law, or a DAO model framework. And basically what they're trying to achieve with that is to create proposals to help achieve a functional and regulatory equivalence between those types of organizations, i.e. DAOs, algorithmically regulated DAOs, and existing corporate entities, to kind of sort of craft the type of infrastructure that exists with your traditional corporate or corporates, but now focused really around decentralized autonomous organization type structures. But I'd have to say that there's still a lot that needs to be done around this. It's still a lot of work that still needs to be done around this, because, as I say, institutions they're not particularly countries are still sort of trying to sort of wrap their heads around what these types of organizations are about. But having said that, though, DAOs are only expected to increase as an organizational model for the digital economy. So as you know, as the digital economy increases, as we're looking at things like sort of opportunities in further Web3 type technological advancements, such as the metaverse, the roles, for example, that other types of technologies, such as or assets such as NFTs would play in this space. There's that need to create a full environment for the operation and and if you like, set legal infrastructures or legal wrappers, if you like, around the operation of DAOs, to kind of really have a seamless approach to the advancement in that direction, in the direction of sort of giving people the opportunities to actually engage fully, if you like, in a decentralized way, which is what Web3 is about. But then also doing it in such a way that if there are issues, people are actually able to know how to deal with the issue. So if there are if we have things like problems with smart contracts or decentralized applications not working, people aren't they're not left without remedy, which would then mean that they would have recourse, if you like, to actually the legal system. And all of this would require that we actually do have some sort of recognition of DAOs, and also being able to sort of engage our legal system to be able to help resolve issues when issues arise involving these DAOs, particularly as they impact users, as they impact members, and the like.
And I guess as well, making the risk proportionate, because one of the problems at the moment that I've seen is people are trying to use existing legal wrappers to apply them to DAOs, and they don't quite work. It's a little bit square peg and round hole, and you run into the problems around liability and partnerships and so on. So it'd be good to see how that evolves then in the next year or two. So my other question is on DeFi, because we're talking about crypto exchanges before, and however many crypto exchanges there are in the world now, it's probably in the hundreds. Most of them are centralized crypto exchanges, which is easier to understand conceptually and also easier to regulate, because they will be companies that have a they're in a particular jurisdiction that's regulated. When you move into the pure DeFi applications where everything is decentralized and there isn't necessarily a particular company sitting somewhere, how can regulation play nicely with DeFi and pure decentralized applications?
Okay, so again, this is a very interesting question, and I have to say that there's now a lot of interest, even amongst traditional financial institutions in DeFi, and of course we know that traditional financial institutions have to comply with things like KYC, obviously very significant and really developers are now beginning to look at opportunities that can happen for traditional finance, having a protocol that's permissionless. They're beginning to sort of explore sort of permission protocols that would require that at least parties that want to actually come on board and transact protocols have to fulfill things like KYC in order to just bring on board traditional financial institutions. And gradually, we're actually seeing these provisions happening. So I think Aave, for example, have such a mechanism in place where they've got a permissionless protocol for those that want to engage without having to fulfill KYC. And also they have a permissioned protocol for those who have to fulfill KYC, but coming from traditional financial institutions. So there are mechanisms and a lot of developments happening in the space, even as we speak. So yeah, there are ways, but having like you said, there's still huge questions that I'd, for example, say that well, if you can produce, or if you can create a permission protocol, as a blockchain finance based firm, why not just provide that sort of platform and require everybody? But that's my regulatory hat on. But at the same time, because we're wanting as much people to engage and benefit in this whole Web3 type approach that gives people the opportunity to actually do things directly on their own without having to engage intermediaries, which really is the future, whether we're looking at sort of things that how things pan out with the metaverse, then I think it's really for regulators to begin to devise mechanisms to actually regulate the space rather than actually stifling the space, which I think is the reason why there's no perfect and silver bullet, if you like, approach to, for example, DAOs. It's very nice to see that regulatory lawyers are actually beginning to look at mechanisms to actually put legal wrappers around these types of organizations, just so that we can give these types of organizations an opportunity to exist, and also that innovation is not stifled, but to give it an opportunity to flourish.
So that leads quite nicely on to my next question about the Centre of Fintech at the University of East London. Like you were just talking about how you want to make Web3 and fintech and all these things flourish because there's lots of benefits attached to that, both on an individual level and a company level and a state and a global level as well. Can you talk about why the University of East London decided to set up a very specific domain-focused Centre of Fintech?
The University of East London decided to set up the Centre of Fintech, obviously because we know that financial technology. I mean, one of the questions you asked me initially, I think at the very beginning was, you started out in financial regulation, but your career has then sort of evolved, and your focus now is actually fintech. There's almost as though presenting that there's a total shift of focus. There isn't actually a shift of focus, but that this is the direction of play, if you like. Financial services are actually moving towards very technologically based products and services. So whether we like it or not, this is the direction of the future. And the reason why I've said this is because, I mean, the UK is, if you like, the global hub of fintech. I'd like to say, I think we're number 2, but we're quite high up on the list, and we're there. And there's also this whole idea also for us to be, the global hub for crypto asset, but that's at another side. So I think it would be, it's very relevant an area for any higher education institution to sort of want to look at, and an area very needing of focused research, because as you know, the whole area of fintech, as we've spoken about, requires a lot of research. It still requires a lot of work from a regulatory perspective, even from a financial perspective. We're talking about, DAOs and financial organizations that are built, or decentralized applications that are built on DAOs, but are purely financial and providing financial services. And a lot of these organizations, if you look very carefully, they're actually run by computer scientists, and with some of them with finance background, some without, and have had to sort of learn some of the finance that they've learned. So there's a huge opportunity, and because there are huge gaps in knowledge. So fintech covers the finance side of things, it covers the technology side of things, it covers obviously the regulatory side of things, and the legal side of things, as we've spoken about, looking at DAOs. And so there's a huge need to build expertise, and not just build expertise on a theoretical basis, but build expertise with huge and significant engagement with industry. Because like I had said to you earlier, the whole area of financial technologies is evolving very speedily. And some of the evolution of it is happening not at university departments. Actually, they're actually happening on ground. They're happening in industry. They're happening in industry. So there's a huge need for research, and research that collaborates with industry. Hence, our focus at the UEL Centre of Fintech, to engage significantly with industry. So there's a huge need to educate. There's a huge need for fintech education, which is one of the remits of our work. Huge need for fintech research, which again we have cut out as part of our work to do. Huge need to engage with industry, working very closely with industry to produce projects of commercial relevance. And of course, the regulatory and policy dimension of things. Countries across the world are still very confused, if you like, in certain regard as to how to approach areas such as crypto assets, DAOs, the metaverse, and the like. And so the whole area lends itself for significant research. And those are the things that have spurred the University of East London to actually establish the Centre of Fintech. And these are really exciting times for us. We're quite excited by the work remit that we have, and the industry players that we engage with, people like yourselves. We're quite excited to do this type of work.
So there's a big gap in the market for knowledge and research and expertise, which you're looking to fill. So on that point, just to wrap up, we've spoken about a lot of things which some people might see as buzzwords, fintech and Web3 and metaverse and DAOs and blockchain, but it's obviously a lot more than buzzwords, because there's a lot of investment and resource that's gone into these industries and sectors. What would you say to young people that are interested in these areas and looking to get into them, and the opportunity that potentially is there over the next decade or so? What advice would you give those people?
Really, I'd give young people the advice to actually look at fintech as an interdisciplinary area, for example. So if you're interested in the finance side of things, there are huge opportunities in the finance side of things. If you're interested in the technology side of things, huge opportunities there. I say to younger people, and really younger people who care to listen, I'm talking primary school level now, that engage with things like sort of coding, programming, because there will come a time when, for us, it was coming on board with word processing and typing, just transitioning from handwriting things to typing your coursework when we were at school and things. We had to sort of learn that. For them, I can so clearly see a situation where there might be a certain degree of requirement to be able to code to get certain types of jobs. So one of the advice I'll give is particularly to young people, is that if you feel you have time in your hands, try coding, try sort of a bit of programming with different types of languages out there, Python and the like. Just put your hands out there and just try those areas. If you're interested in fintech, even fantastically so, huge opportunities, because the huge opportunities for fintech developers, huge opportunities for programmers in different dimensions, as we've mentioned. For example, in the crypto asset space, for example, in this whole Web3 space. So there are huge opportunities for those interested who feel, oh, I'm not quite technical. I'd like to sort of stick with things like on the policy dimension and things. Then, if you're interested in studying law and the policy issues around sort of regulating this area of law, then again, this is a huge area and huge opportunities from the regulatory and policy dimension. And some of these areas, University of East London, we're looking at these things, and it's a good forum, to actually engage or look up what we do, the area of research of some of the colleagues there working on fintech related activities. So at UEL, for example, we have an MBA in fintech. We've got an LLM in fintech, law and regulation. We have an MSc in blockchain and fintech. Again, which purely looks at things from a technological perspective. So these are very interesting times, and I would encourage young people to just, depending on the aspect that you're interested in, just hone in on it and just run with it, because they're huge opportunities.
Fantastic. So yeah, if anyone does want to find out more, they can check out the Centre of Fintech at the University of East London. So Dr. Iwa Salami, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Matthew, for having me.